Hi children, and welcome to today's history lesson, which is all about the Blitz, obviously continuing our work on World War II, and today's question is, how significant was the Blitz? But before we go on to the Blitz, before we start, we're going to start with a quick recap, see if you can remember some of the key knowledge from earlier lessons, because as it says there, knowledge is power after all. The more we know, the more we can understand what happened in World War II. So, I wonder if you can remember. Question number 1, when did World War II begin? Pause the video, have a think. If you don't know, have a look, quick check back in your book. Okay, so when did World War II begin? Well, if I just click on the answer there, it says in September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany. The declaration was made by the Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Winston Churchill would later become the Prime Minister on the 10th of May 1940. So, well done if you got that one. Right, get ready for question number 2. What happened in 1938 that was a particularly significant event in the lead up to the war? So this was a year before the war started. Can anyone remember what happened in the lead up to the war? I'll give you a clue. It was Germany invading somewhere. Okay, hopefully you've had a go at that question. Pause the video if not. The answer to that one was Germany invaded Austria and Czechoslovakia. If you remember, Hitler wanted to take back some of the countries and some of the power that Germany had lost. He wanted to build a superpower, and one of the big invasions they made in 1938 was into Austria and Czechoslovakia. Right, on to question 3, our final recap question. What was it that happened in 1939, in September 1939, that really was the trigger for the start of the war, that led to the start of the war? I wonder who can remember that. Again, if you're not sure, a clue is it involves Germany's invasion of somewhere. Okay, hopefully you've answered that question, or look back in your book. The answer was Germany actually invaded Poland, and Britain and France had agreed in place. They had an agreement in place to protect Poland if this happened, and this basically triggered the war. So Britain gave Germany until 11 o'clock on the 3rd of September 1939 to remove their troops. Germany did not respond, and at 11:15, Neville Chamberlain declared war on Germany, which triggered the start of the World War II. So I just wanted to do that as a quick recap before we get started. Right, let's get on to our question then. How significant was the Blitz? Well, first of all, you need to understand what the Blitz was. So it says here, what was the Blitz and how do these images make you feel? So I want you to have a think as you look at this picture here. What do you think we're referring to when we say the Blitz? Does anyone know what the Blitz is? And how do these images make you feel? As you can see, there's some sort of church or cathedral, and there's lots of rubble. Clues does that give you as to what the Blitz is? Those people looking out over the rubble there, obviously destroyed to pieces. We've got another picture here. Again, I think it's of the same cathedral. People walking along the streets, and bricks everywhere. You can see some smoke still. So it gives us lots of clues. Obviously, the Blitz is to do with bombings and then the destruction of buildings here. And I'll click onto another picture. Again, similar scene, but this time not on a cathedral, but it's on a street, isn't it? You can see lots of fence panels and debris everywhere. You wouldn't be able to drive down that street, would you? It's obviously the street's been decimated by bombings. And here's another image for you to have a look at. Quite a shocking image. You can see there's some sort of destruction in the ground, and the cars actually rolled into the floor there and completely decimated the whole area. Well, what was the Blitz then, and how those images make you feel? Well, the images are quite scary. I mean, if you can imagine images like that today, if you can imagine buildings being destroyed like today, that'd be a terrifying sight, wouldn't it? And what was the Blitz? Well, I'm sure you figured that out. The Blitz was a series of bombings by the German army on Britain. So actually what it was on 7th of September 1940, so we're talking a year after the war now, after the war first broke out. Basically, German bombers started targeting key cities across Britain, such as most notably London, but also places like Coventry and Manchester. And they also targeted the rest of Britain as well, so Cardiff and Swansea in Wales, Belfast in Northern Ireland, and Clyde back in Scotland. So they did this to target big key cities. And the Blitz was basically a period of intensive bombing that continued for around 8 months. And this period of intensive bombing by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, became known as the Blitz. And it says here, the Blitz took place from the 7th of September 1940 to the 11th of May 1941, which is 8 months and 5 days. The term Blitz was first used by British press, and it originated from the term Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg was a German word for lightning war, and as you can imagine, the lightning war, well, if bombs are coming down from the sky, it's going to create this, these big lights flying up in the air, a bit like a lightning bomb. So you can see where the word originated from, Blitzkrieg there. So what happened during the war, during the Blitz, was bombing was incredibly damaging. It was regular, ongoing, for a sustained period of time from the Luftwaffe for 8 months and 5 days. And many historic buildings, such as Coventry Cathedral, were flattened, and large cities had to be rebuilt. And you can see here, if you go onto Google and type in Blitz buildings destruction or something like that, there are hundreds upon hundreds of images of buildings being shattered and destroyed, and these are all pictures from the Blitz. You can see completely ruined the local area, destroyed the streets, rubble everywhere. You can just imagine the dust in and around you. If I flick back to the first image here, this is a Coventry Cathedral, very famous big cathedral, and it was absolutely decimated by the Blitz. And that's what a lot of what the Blitz was. These ongoing bombing attacks by the German army, designed to affect the key cities, the key areas of Britain. So what did people have to do during the Blitz? Well, you can imagine it was a very terrifying time. Many cities had to be evacuated, with many thousands of people being evacuated to the countryside. In fact, many people were evacuated from the big cities as soon as war was announced in 1939. So as soon as war was announced, many people left the big cities and were sent off into the countryside. Many children separated from their home. I'll go on to evacuation in a bit. However, those that did stay in the cities, they had to live by strict rules. So one of the things was, at night, the cities would go into what was known as blackout, whereby all the street lights were switched off and thick black curtains and paint covered every window. This was designed as a method of protecting cities, in that aeroplanes overhead would not be able to see the cities. So most of the air attacks during the Blitz, they took place at night. And then what they did in the big cities, like London here, you can see this girl, there's an extra sort of blackout sheet that meant that no light was released out from the houses, and the idea was to make a complete blackout. Obviously we have street lights and all sorts at night now, but what they tried to do was create this blackout effect, and blackout would take place from a certain point in the day, in the evening time, and you would not be able to have any lights on, all your curtains raised up. So basically, hopefully, the aeroplanes can't see the cities or the big areas of lots of people. That was one of the things they used to do during that period. Other things they used to do during this period was use air raid shelters. So another strategy used to protect against the bombings was the use of an air raid shelter. For those that had a garden, many people had an air raid shelter built from iron that was buried in the ground. During a raid, people would sit for hours waiting until all the all clear was sounded. Those who did not have an air raid shelter would often stay in the underground train tunnel systems, with many hundreds of people down there at a time. And again, if you type in air raid shelter, or Anderson shelter as they were sometimes known, there's many images of air raid shelters, and there's still many of them still exist today. As you can see, very cramped. Lots of people would have been stuck inside these air raid shelters for many hours at a time, listening to the bombings that are taking place outside. Imagine it was very terrifying. You can see here some benches. You can imagine lots of people cramped in, sitting on the benches, huddled together. And I love this picture here. It's a picture of a woman watering the plants into an air raid shelter. All different designs and shapes, but none of them looking too appealing. You can imagine it very scary, but the idea was that they would keep you safe from the bombings if you went in there at night. And later on, I've actually got some diary entries from a lady at the time that references air raid shelters. Other things that went on during the Blitz, well, many men and women responded to the bombings by volunteering to work as air raid precautions or air raid precaution wardens, or as extra ambulance drivers to keep peoples and communities as safe as possible. So basically, the country came together, and people volunteered to do work. They would sit out at night and raise the sirens to say it's time to go into your air raid shelters, or to say when blackout will take place. You can see here he's setting the time for blackout. Or to work as ambulance drivers, to drive around and pick people up, anyone that's injured. So community spirit's a big thing, and obviously we also hear the things of people singing songs in the air raid shelters to keep up their strength and happiness and keeping everyone together in what was a very, very difficult time. And there's some pictures there of some different people that have helped out in different ways there. Evacuation that I talked about earlier. As mentioned earlier, many people were evacuated during the Blitz. Many children living in big cities and towns were moved temporarily from their homes to places considered safer, usually out in the countryside. There was 3 big evacuations during the World War. One was the Blitz, and then there were 2 other major ones as well. So it refers to them here. It says the British evacuation began on Friday the 1st September 1939. So this is the start of the war. And it says it was called Operation Pied Piper. There were 3 major evacuations during the war effort. So the first one was at the start of the war, 2 days before the declaration on the 3rd September. But by January 1940, most 60% of people had returned to their homes. There was then another evacuation, a major evacuation, that started after Germans had taken over most of France. And this was from June 13th to June the 18th, 1940. And again, around 100,000 children were evacuated or re-evacuated. And then the final big one was on the 7th of September 1940, which was when the Blitz began. And any children who had returned home to the big cities or had not been evacuated were then evacuated at that point. What tended to happen was children were removed from their families. So often the children left and went out into the countryside, to the safer areas, and had to leave their families behind. Not a very pleasant experience at all, very scary for a child. You can see here the picture of the child there with their belongings, not very old at all, and then having to leave and head off into the countryside, leave their families, not knowing if they'll ever see them again. And again, we've got an account later from a lady who talks about that experience. Sir John Anderson, a member of the House of Commons and placed in charge of air raid precautions, divided the UK into 3 areas. 1, evacuation area, where heavy bomb is expected, so big cities like London and Coventry. Neutral, areas that would not need to send or receive evacuees because they were considered not too dangerous. They were unlikely to get bombed, but they couldn't be certain. And then there was things called reception areas, and these were rural areas where evacuees would be sent, where children would go out to the countryside, to rural areas, and hopefully be safe from the bombing. The Blitz itself, by the end of the Blitz, so again 11th of May 1941, 8 months, 5 days after the start, and 7th September 1940, by the end of the Blitz, millions of buildings had been destroyed and thousands of people had died. However, had Britain not been prepared, or had so many children not been evacuated to safety, the number of people could have been far, far greater. In total, the Blitz, the figures are saying that there's around 40 to 43,000 civilians were killed, and around 46,000 to 139 civilians were injured. So you can see there was lots and lots of damage, many innocent people killed, civilians like members of the public, innocent people killed, hundreds of thousands injured during the Blitz. And the most shocking statistic here, the damage it did, well, around 2 million houses were damaged or destroyed during the Blitz, and 60% of these were in London. So you can see a major target point for the German army was London, as that was the most powerful city in England, as it is now. And you can see there lots of images. You can imagine the streets regularly being bombed and destroyed and battered by the German army as they let bombs out on the streets and on the buildings. So there was a major impact there, and this is an image of it. You can imagine at night, it's about this lightning war, the German Air Force at night flying over the top of the buildings, dropping the bombs below, and the fire and the destruction that took place beneath it. And this was a sustained period. 8 months is a long period of time. So this was ongoing. People had to live through this day after day, carry on with their normal day in the day, try and go to work if they can, or help out with the war effort if they can. And at night, blackout, go into the air raid shelters, hide away, and just hope that your street didn't get bombed. I've got 2 video clips for you now. The first clip is a news report from London that actually took place during the Blitz, and you can get an idea of quite how scary it was during the Blitz. And then clip 2 kind of recounts some of the information I've talked about here, and also includes some recounts from people that actually lived through the Blitz, so they're really, really interesting to listen to. So have a listen to those now.
This is London. At the moment, everything is quiet. For reasons of national as well as personal security, I am unable to tell you the exact location from which I'm speaking. You may be able to hear the sound of guns off in the distance, very distinctly, like someone kicking a tub. The searchlights are stretching out now in this general direction. I can hear just the faint whisper of an aircraft high overhead. Again, those guns are a considerable distance away. Now you'll hear 2 bursts a little nearer in a moment. There they are. That hard, stomping sound. Understanding of the life in London these days. There are no words to describe the thing that is happening. The courage of the people, the flash and roar of the guns rolling down the streets, the stench of the air raid shelters. In 3 or 4 hours, people must get up and go to work, just as though they had a full night's rest, free from the rumble of guns, and the wonder that comes when they wake and listen in the dead hours of the night. At dawn, Londoners come oozing out of the ground, tired and red-eyed and sleepy. The fires are dying down. I saw them turn into their own street to see if their house was still standing. No one could avoid being impressed with the patience and calm determination of these people who dwell in little houses.
In the Second World War, you could be in serious danger even if you weren't fighting at the front. In September 1940, German bombers began targeting key cities across Britain, from London, Coventry and Manchester in England, Cardiff and Swansea in Wales, through to Belfast in Northern Ireland and Clydebank in Scotland. This period of intensive bombing carried on for 8 months and became known as the Blitz. The bombing during the Blitz was incredibly damaging. Historic buildings like Coventry Cathedral were flattened, and large parts of cities had to be rebuilt. Those who stayed in the cities had to live by strict rules. Every night when it got dark, the cities would go into blackout. All the street lights were switched off, and special thick black curtains and paint covered every window to make sure cities could not be seen from aeroplanes overhead. If you had a garden, you might have an air raid shelter made from iron buried in the ground, where you would have to sit for hours during a raid until the all clear was sounded. Other people used communal shelters. In London, many people used the underground to shelter from bombs. Many men and women responded to the bombings by volunteering to work as air raid precautions, or ARP wardens, or as extra ambulance drivers to keep people and their communities as safe as possible. However, thousands of people had already been evacuated to the safer countryside when war was first declared. Most of these were children, separated from their parents. Kitty was evacuated on September the 1st, 1939, which also happened to be her 9th birthday.
Mother said, well, you're going on a trip. And I really thought it was a birthday trip. We're all given this little cardboard box. But I opened it and inside was a rubber gas mask. All the boys could put them on and make funny noises. And we were all in fits of laughter. We really thought it was a joke. we really thought we were going out for a day. Got to the school, all happy with this cardboard box. The label was put on us, all of us enjoying it. Coach came on the coach, sing away. And then on the train.
Once the children arrived in the countryside, they were taken to a school and told to stand in a line.
In came lots of strange looking people. They had walking sticks, and some of them had dogs and funny hats on, and they walked by and they said, that one. Teacher said, off you go, Bob, off you go with that lady. One by one we were all picked off and sent away.
Kitty was separated from one of her sisters and sent to live in a horrible place.
We went down into a basement, and we looked down and she said, there was these sort of cobbled steps. She said, go down there, that's your room. And then we'll walk down, and it was a mattress on the floor. And we were so tired we didn't care. It was like bricks on the wall. It wasn't a wall, plasterboard, just bricks. I'd never seen it before, with a little opening with bars on it.
But even if the evacuations were upsetting, at least it was safer than being in the system, especially when the Germans sent over flying bombs and rockets towards the end of the wall. Bernard remembers these flying bombs.
Well, they had a ramjet engine, and it went, and it got to London, and most of them ran out of fuel. Some power died, but most of it. So you've got this coming along, and it stopped. And it's got little stubby wings, so it didn't fall down vertically, it glided. So within 5 seconds you knew whether you were going to be killed or not.
Did you know, throughout the Blitz, the King and Queen remained in Buckingham Palace in London to show the public they were all in it together. On the first night of the Blitz, many hundreds of people were killed in the East End of London. About a week later, 2 bombs fell on Buckingham Palace and the King and Queen only just avoided death. Afterwards, the Queen said, I'm glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel we can look the East End in the face. By the end of the Blitz, millions of buildings had been destroyed and thousands of people had died. But had Britain not been prepared, or had so many children not been evacuated to safety, the number of people killed could have been far greater. However, the Blitz was not the only time Britain was bombed. After the Allied success on D-Day in 1944, Germans started launching their new weapons, flying bombs and rockets called the V1 and the V2. They wouldn't stop until a few months before the end of the war, and until then, ordinary people across Britain just had to hold on.
So as you can hear from those videos, it was a remarkable time, very intense bombing, very scary time for the British people, mass destruction of the major cities, and for children, lots of children evacuated from the areas, unsure as to why, what was going on, or how long it would go on for. Like the woman in the video said, at first they thought it was all good fun and a joke, and didn't really know what was coming. This here on screen is some actual diary entries that we've acquired and got hold of that were written by somebody during the war, and they're just quite interesting to read. So it says, in December 1940 we had the Blitz. My sister Claire, born June 1940, that must mean so the baby sister, was sleeping in her Moses basket against the stair wall where the piano is, with a piece of plywood to protect her. I had whooping cough and had my bed on the wall against the front room, in what was our drawing room, with the kitchen table over the bed. For my protection, my sister Catherine was in Llandudno, that's in Wales, so she'd been sent away for evacuation. My parents were sitting by the fire in the front room listening to the wireless is the radio. They decided not to go down into the shelter. In Cave 1, I gave whooping cough to the others, so they actually decided against going down to the shelter that night because she'd given this illness, this whooping cough, to other people, so they actually decided to stay in the house and hope that their street wasn't hit. I gave whooping cough to the others when the bomb fell. It came between number 23 and number 21, so this number's in the street, landed in the middle of the cul-de-sac, and for once everyone was glad. The road was unmade, as in unadopted, so it sank, and the bomb exploded underground. So they were happy it didn't actually hit any houses or destroy anything. It hit the road. However, it did ruin sewage, electrical, gas, telephone. Then we went to join the others in the shelter. So after that, when they heard the bomb on their street go off, they went to join us in the shelter, and it snowed, and they all had a dreadful job coping with the sanitation sickness because they had no services. So people became very ill because after that, it was snowing, that no one could get to their street because the road was destroyed, but luckily none of them were hit. So this was, Mrs. Withers actually got hold of these letters. They're from a relative of someone she knows, and they're actual letters that were written at the time, or diary entries written at the time. After a day or two, my father decided he'd try and get the car out around the rim of the crater, so it's the hole in the ground. Of course, the car fell in, so it didn't work. On the night of the bomb, somewhere, I can't quite read what it says, was blitzed dreadfully, so the area around it was blitzed dreadfully. My father held it on his shoulder as we went to the shelter. By the back door he said, "Look, never forget what they've done to my sister." I'll never forget that moment. The entire sky, this is the best bit, the entire sky and horizon was lit with fires. The air raid warden used to visit the shelter most nights. My parents rarely went to the shelter after that. So it was clear, you can tell this picture of like an orange sky with fire everywhere, and that's what she's writing about here. And then he goes into a few of the bits. It says, but the Harris family and children, Pammy, Ronnie, went every single night of the war. They were Jewish and had a fear of Germans and an invasion. My mother used to see them going by the kitchen window every night. And the shelter, it was built sometime between July, September, October 1940. My father organised it. And as we had the youngest baby in the cul-de-sac, it was decided our garden should have it. But I understand, and then it says some other people, or 6 houses contributed to the cost. So there's a direct recount, someone recalling all about those Anderson shelters, about the air raid shelters, the sky being lit with fire, and the explosion in the street, and then the illness and sickness. You don't think about that, do you? But the idea that because they couldn't get any emergency services, people became very sick and ill, and no one could look after them. No electricity. So you imagine how cold it was. It said it snowed. And then the street coming together as well, it's about community spirit again, so everyone contributes to the cost of it all together. But because they had the youngest baby, they put it in their back garden. And hear about the Jewish family, obviously very scared of the Nazis. They went to the shelter every single night of the war. That's 6 years long. So it gives you an idea of the impact of the Blitz and what this was. As well as the Blitz, however, there were some other major bombing events in World War II. And part of this question is how significant was the Blitz? So I'm just going to give you some brief information, some other major bombing events, not based on UK soil. And you can think about these in comparison to the Blitz, which is on UK soil. So another major bombing event was Dresden in Germany. The bombing of Dresden was a British and American aerial bombing attack on the city of Dresden, Germany, during World War II. In 4 raids between the 13th and 15th of February 1945, 722 heavy bombers of the British Royal Air Force and 527 of the United States Army Air Forces dropped more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs on the city. The bombing destroyed more than 1,600 acres, that's 6.5 kilometres squared of the city centre, and an estimated 22 to 25,000 people were killed. So obviously we think of the World War II in terms of the bombings on our own country, but here we've got a major bombing of a German city here that also resulted in mass deaths and people dying. So another very sad event. Other major events, we've got Stalingrad in Russia. One thing to notice about this one is it took place over 2 days and 4 raids, so it's a lot shorter event, but the number of people dying, a lot. Stalingrad in Russia. Stalingrad, a Soviet city on the River Volga, Russia, was bombed heavily by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, during the Battle of Stalingrad in World War II. German land forces had advanced to the suburbs of Stalingrad by August 1942. The city was firebombed with 1,000 tons of high explosives on 23rd of August. This was a 1-day attack. The destruction was monumental and complete, turning Stalingrad into a sea of fire and killing thousands of civilians and soldiers. Further fire attacks were mounted against the ruined city for the next 2 days, enveloping it in a dense volcano-like black smoke clouds that stretched 3.5 kilometers into the sky. So again, a very tragic event. The Blitz itself was an 8-month event and killed many people night by night. But these two big impact bombing events, one here by the British and American Army, and another one here by the German Army and in Russia, that involved the death of many thousands of people, many 10,000s of people. And perhaps one of the most shocking events in history is Hiroshima in Japan. Hiroshima, you might have heard of, was it's where the United States Air Force, they detonated 2 nuclear weapons, or atomic bombs as they're known, over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August the 6th and 9th, 1945 respectively. So August the 6th, Hiroshima, they dropped what's known as an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb, on the city, and then they did the same to Nagasaki in Japan on August the 9th. The 2 bombings killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people, most of whom were civilians, and remain the only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. Hiroshima, 20,000 soldiers killed, 70,000 to 126,000 civilians killed. Nagasaki, 39,000 to 80,000 killed, at least 150 soldiers killed. And there you see that sort of mushroom smoke effect of an atomic bomb. Never again has that ever been used in war. That the impact is so devastating, and one of the most shocking moments in world history was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the atomic bombs sent up there, and hopefully never ever again. So you can see that whilst the Blitz was a horrendous period of time for the British people, there are also many shocking events of major bombing incidents across the world during World War II. It was a truly tragic and horrific time for the whole world. Now, in terms of comparing and contrasting that, what I'd like to do very quickly is just have a think. The Blitz, Dresden, Stalingrad, Hiroshima, what similarities are there between those attacks, and maybe what differences are there? Just pause the video for a couple of minutes, have a think, have a look back at this page. What can you see as similarities between the events of the Blitz, what similarities are between all of them, and what differences are there? Just pause the video. Okay, so I did a similar thing, and this is what I came up with. Well, obviously, all involve horrific damage to buildings and the local environment. They're all big cities. They're designed to destroy these big cities. All involve thousands of deaths, civilians and soldiers, tens of thousands of people dying. Probably Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the highest there, 129 to 226,000. Probably the highest death toll there. The Blitz was a longer period of bombing, so over 8 months, whereas all of these are quite short. There's a 2-day raid, four raids over 2 days, a main event on 1 day here, and then obviously 2 separate bombing atomic bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima, I think, is the shocking and deadly use of an atomic bomb and a nuclear weapon. This is the only time an atomic bomb has ever been used during war. And you can see that one there, a very famous picture of the atomic bomb, and a truly tragic event. So, like the Blitz, some really terrible events in world history during World War II. Now, what I want you to do, you've done lots of listening and learning, and hopefully you've found that really interesting and found out a lot. I found out a lot as I put the lesson together. What I want you to do now is present your learning based on the question, how significant was the Blitz? Some key success for you, make sure you include the following: when it started, where the word comes from, talk about the fact it was the bombing of major cities and how long it went on for, and the destruction that took place. The blackout we talked about earlier, air raid shelters, community spirit and people volunteering for jobs, evacuation, and the statistics around the number of people dying or the number of people injured, as well as the number of houses damaged. Remember to use the information you gather from this lesson and present how you want. So it could be a double page spread, or it could be a PowerPoint that pulls all this information together. Mixture of writing and pictures. As a stretch, what I'd like you to do is maybe include some information about Dresden, Stalingrad and Hiroshima, and do a bit of comparison and contrast between the two, between those events and the Blitz, maybe similarities and differences. And that's a little stretch thing you can put on there as a bit of a higher level thinking, which would be really impressive. Again, a really good example of a double page spread there, which might be something you want to do. I have put onto Teams some pictures from this lesson that you can use, or if you're at home and you're at home learning, please just have a look on the internet, type in these words, have a look at some pictures of your own and make your own one, but those are always something you can cut out and stick onto your piece. I'm sure you'll do an amazing job of it. Thank you for listening really carefully, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.